You're going to have the benefit of me up here instead of Terry because we're running late, but that's okay because I've got a very short sermon today. I am humbled to be in this position. Didn't think this was in the plan for me. In fact, I fought it for a long time. My grandmother turned 90 this month, and we celebrated her birthday with a large portion of our family, her church family. A lot of them came, cousins, and all 6 of her kids were there, which is maybe a once or twice a year occasion. So it was very special for her, and they're all. Well, they're probably done with that now, but they were all camping in my. Everybody's staying up here today. They were all camping in my backyard, and this weekend, so that was quite an experience. But anyway, back to my grandmother. My grandma for many years kept saying, I think you're going to end up in ministry somewhere. And she had kind of been okay with me working at Hannibal LaGrange because she said, I always thought you'd be a minister, and you are. I think she could even use that word, kinda. You kinda are. And I kind of was. In that position, I was fortunate to be in a place that not just allowed but encouraged me to share my faith and to build the spiritual part of those students, whether it was the students I coached or the students that I brought in from overseas to study there. And that was a huge blessing. But obviously, the call and the seed was planted with an ask to come and do youth part-time, and I didn't feel it was the right time. I didn't feel it was the right position. And many of you probably don't know the story, but I feel like our youth deserve more than that, and especially what I could give them part-time. I can tell you what I can give part-time because I'm trying to do like 9 things part-time right now, between coach two Little League teams and 4-H and other things. It's hard, and so passed up on that, but that seed was planted. And so then when the opportunity arose again, it was one of those fights where you're getting pulled this way, but you were really trying hard to go the opposite direction. And I just thank God that I finally let go of whatever was over there. This sermon's not about me, just so you know, but that's the easiest way I could think of to get into this idea of our purpose, of what does God have for us, and not necessarily God's will for our lives as far as where we end up as doctor, lawyer, preacher, whatever, but what are we really here for? And we've spent the last school year based around our Impact 180s. Each month we did a different kind of topic, but then throughout that we've thrown it into our youth meetings as well and gone a little bit more in depth for the students who attend with us on Wednesday and Sunday nights as to what context are we going to live our lives in. Are we going to live our lives in the context of the world, or are we going to live our lives in the context of the commandment of God? And so I kind of just want to give a brief overview of what we've talked about. Our students, this is going to be a review, but I don't think that's bad. Any time that I got the opportunity to review in school, I was very happy. You've only have so much room in there, so being reminded of what's there already is better than getting a lot of new information. And for you adults, one, I don't want you to miss the fact that maybe you need to take a look at the context you're living in. But two, we've celebrated them so much today, but our youth needs you to help push them in that direction, in that right context. And a couple verses, a couple rundowns, and we're going to sing a song and praise God again with our voices and our music. And I'm going to go eat a ham sandwich at Mount Prairie Cemetery, which I'm so excited about. That's ham sandwiches. I'm glad you thought that was funny. We started out in John 13, and I had a slideshow, and the worship pastor couldn't get it up there, so I don't know what his problem was this morning. We forgot to hire a new one for the week. John 13, verses 31 through 35 reads, "When he had gone out, Jesus said, 'Now the Son of Man is glorified, and God is glorified in him. If God is glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself, and will glorify him at once.'" That's a lot of ways to say this. I believe, and I don't think I'm the only one, because it's not my idea, because I don't understand that either when I read it the first time. But I don't know how to put this any more delicately. God doesn't need us to raise our hands. I mean, for him to survive, he doesn't need us to sit around and worship him all day long. He could have created us to do that, to just sit and worship him. Obviously, he gave us the ability to do other things. And while I believe that is important, if that was what we did 24/7, 365, I really think we'd be missing the point. Jesus goes on to say this, "Children, I am with you a little while longer. You will look for me, and just as I told the Jews, where I am going you cannot come, so now I tell you." And this is important. "I give you a new command. Love one another, just as I have loved you. You must also love one another. By this, all people will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." So instead, because God's perfectly capable of being glorified without us, our way of glorifying him is to love one another, love each other, love other Christians, love those who have no idea who Christ is the way that he loves them. And that's the context. That's what we talked about all year long, right? Am I right about this? Or I didn't just make this up this week, right? Okay, good. I'm getting some affirmation. That's a good thing. Because we would have had to start all over next year if I had missed that point. Going back to Galatians, just to kind of, Paul reiterates this, Galatians 5, verse 13, he says, "For you were called to be free, brothers, only don't use this freedom as an opportunity for the flesh. Don't just do things for yourselves because you're free in Christ. But serve one another through love, for the entire law is fulfilled in one statement. Love your neighbor as yourself. But if you bite and devour one another, watch out, or you will be consumed by one another." So love your neighbor as yourself, the entire law. He was talking to Jewish people who had these 10 commandments, who had 660, I think, some odd laws that they had, from the way they washed their hands before they eat, to the kind of food they could eat, to how they wore their shoes in the house, all of these things. He was talking to these people, and he's like, okay, take that list of 600 and whatever laws, okay, take the 10 commandments, and we're going to squish them down to this. Love your neighbor as yourself. When we do that, it's as good as standing here and glorifying God, because we are loving his creation the way that he wants us to. That's the context. That's what we talked about all year long. And we put it in each month, we put it in these little areas of our lives that I believe, and I may have been way off point in a few of them, but things I know that if they're not dealing with now, they're going to. The way we serve people. We are in this culture that is all about service. People, it seems to be the entire platform of one of our political parties is we have to help people who are in need, and that is awesome. It's great. But if we're just helping them for help, there's nothing lasting in that. We're going to end up as dust. It doesn't matter if we had 3 squares a day or barely got to eat once a week. We still end up in the same place in the ground. And the only lasting help that we can give people when we serve is if we are doing it as a way to glorify our Lord, as a worship to him. Because we're going to be more joyful in that. You have to admit that I did some community service. This just popped into my head. This wasn't what I was going to use, but this will be great. So, Family Fun Center. Lucas Lease is back here, and thank you for being here, Luke. He'll remember this. One of our friends had a party at the Family Fun Center that used to be located on 48th Street, where Daylight Donuts is now, more or less. And He had a party there, and we had decided it was a good idea to run and jump off this wall and dunk these basketballs. Good. And so the party's winding down, and my mother was late, and I love my mother, but she's late all the time. And so she was late, and so I was the last one or two people there, and it may have even been like, hey, Darren, your mom's here. Okay, wait just a second. Run up, put my foot right through that stupid wall, and big old hole. And so, being the good Christian kid I did, I left and didn't tell anybody. And we found out, I need to ask my mom about this, but I don't know if she paid that or took it, I worked on our farm, so I made a little money. I'm sure she paid Family Fun Center for that wall. But to teach me a lesson, she also had it set up to where I had to pick weeds out in front of Family Fun Center one Saturday. And I never jumped off any walls after that, that's for sure. But I did not do it with joy in my heart. I've been blessed since then to do so many things for God's kingdom as far as a service. And when I remember that it's for that it's because I love the people I'm serving, because God loved me first, and this is the way I can show my gratitude for his love, is to love his creation. It's way easier to do that. As a coach at Hannibal LaGrange, I forgot this so many times, and I would be the last one left. Somehow our head coach kind of wandered off at the end of practice. I don't know where he was like Batman. He just disappeared. He would disappear, and I'd turn around, and so had everybody. Like, they would scatter like mice once he left, and I'm left with balls down in the corner, a field to rake, other things that needed to be done. And I started with like gusto. I was like, okay, serving these boys, they got homework to do, or girls to chase, or whatever they were doing. And I would do it, and that joy slowly slipped away, and I could see it slipping. But for that little time, I was doing it because I love those kids, and I wanted to love them the way that I was loved first. That joy was there. And when we serve in the name, we serve in the right context. Context is the word. When we serve in that right context, that joy is there, and that's going to rub off. I don't know how many times, I don't think they were paying attention, but those boys, those guys that I coached, they would graduate, or the ones I kind of left in the middle of their career as I moved on to another job would come to me, and they actually thanked me. They were actually like, we didn't take you for granted. It may have seemed that way, but we didn't. And they saw that joy, and I don't know that it changed any of them right there, but I know their lives changed, and I know that God's love was shown to them. That service and joy, that service in the right context is so important. We were blessed to have Joe Heberlein come and speak to us a couple months ago about his struggles early in life, or with alcohol and drugs. And Joe is very open about that. If you ever need to talk to somebody who has literally laid down syringe or pipe or whatever it was that he was using and walked away, he's a good guy to go talk to, because he literally prayed a prayer, I don't want to do this anymore, and was done. It was powerful. I mean, it was a powerful, powerful message. Understanding our bodies and understanding what God has given to us, again, living in that right context, not wanting to damage ourselves. And I stand here as a guy who needs to run a couple laps, but I know I wear it well because I wear baggy stuff. That's my secret. But we call it the Fun K. It was a 1K run yesterday. We got T-shirts and everything, and I pushed Hooper in his little car, and we were running around our farm and like through the mud and stuff, and these wheels on this car are plastic and that big, and I'm struggling up these hills. I'm about to die. And I got done with the 1K route, and a couple cousins and an uncle went on, and they did a 5K, so they did 5 laps. And I had this grand plan in my mind that I was just, I was 18 again, and I was just going to run those 5 laps. And the motivation was not there once the first lap was finished. So I understand the fact that it's easy to get into a place, whether it's just our general health, and this is something Terry and I talk about a lot, and as a Daniel plan has gone on, I know this is a huge part of it. It's not necessarily about just being healthy, but living in a way that you free your mind from some of the if my back didn't hurt in the morning, I wouldn't have to think about it. And so how we treat our bodies, thinking of that in the right context, thinking as our bodies as a temple where we can worship, that's the context that we want to live in. Relationships was a big one, and the way we bound ourselves together with another human being, and the fact that marriage is specifically set up in a certain way to be lived in the right context was another thing we spoke of. I think this is something that specifically adults, parents can help their kids with. Adults that have influence in other students' lives, is to see when we're playing married before we are. And I don't mean physical stuff even, but that emotional pull towards another person is strong when you're in junior high and high school. I remember, sitting here as the guy who met his wife when he was 15 years old and dated her all through. But I told the kids this, I would give some of those years back to not have the emotional stuff that we carried into our marriage, because we played married too young. We had these strong feelings that we couldn't act on because we were trying to do the right thing, but it hurt us. And I don't know, some of you might be standing out there with that same hurt, that same pain from just simply playing married and not doing those relationships in the right context. A friend of mine talked about struggles him and his wife were having, and they literally went back and prayed for forgiveness for some of the things that had happened before they were married. And the change that made was huge in their life. And I stand up here and I don't want to make my entire life a cautionary tale to these kids, but I feel like we get in this rut where we're like, well, I made that mistake, maybe they need to make it too. I think that's baloney. I think if we can keep our kids from making those mistakes, it would be amazing. And if we can impart that wisdom and say, the world has this one way of looking at things, specifically relationships, I think is so big. If you watch any teen drama, it's ridiculous what these kids are doing and how they are living with each other. But if we can look at it from a biblical context of loving each other the way God loves us, and that meaning that we look at that person who we're in a relationship with, we look at the person who is going to marry that person we're in a relationship with, whether it's us or not, and we focus on loving those people in that sphere, loving the future children of this person that we're dating in high school, and loving them in a way that we don't have to worry that mom and dad are gonna split up because of something that happened in the current relationship that's happening now. If we can live in that context, if we can look for, and this is a statement I said so many times, I think God's best for everybody involved, God's best for us, not the world's good enough, but God's best in those situations, we're going to end up in a much better place. And that's one thing, and specifically relationships, because that's so outward. We see it. My dad tried to have that conversation with me when I was a freshman in high school, and I wish he'd had it about every week until I was 22. And not like the birds and the bees conversation, but really looking for God's best for my life as it related to that relationship. Being in the right context in our service, being in the right context thinking about our bodies, being in the right context in our relationships really gets us to the point where we find God's best in our lives. And so often, I think even well-meaning Christians who really want to live for Christ and do really fulfill that command of loving one another, we miss that mark because we see things in society that look okay, and we settle for good enough and not God's best. God's best is bigger than what we can imagine. I think those of you who have reached that point where you really feel that in your lives know. And that's the type of thing that I want all of you who are not youth to take that wisdom, whether it's pain, be open with your pain. Terry, this wasn't too private a conversation, so I think it'll be okay. But we really said if we would open up about our pain, how much would it help? How much would it help somebody else either avoid that situation altogether or understand I'm not the only person going through that. We're so close-fisted with the things we struggle with. And it's not helping our youth at all, I don't believe, because they see, especially parents, if you're struggling with something, they're going to see it. And if you never talk about it, it might be considered okay. This was going to be a positive. I don't know what happened. I think I don't want to pat ourselves on the back too much, because we have room to grow in this area for sure in leading our youth. We don't graduate one student out of our youth group. And so we still have a little bit of time when they have to do what we tell them. We have a lot of kids in this, first through fifth grade, first through fourth grade area that are going to be coming up. And we still have a lot of influence, again, over these kids that are going to be the next generation of leaders in our church. And what I pray and what I hope for those students is that they understand the context in which they are supposed to live their lives. And that is one where we are loving each other the way that God loved us, to show Him how much we love Him and thank Him for that love. And so I challenge the students, and I'm going to challenge you with this. If you have a special relationship with a student, not necessarily one of your kids, in fact, it probably works better not, pour into them. If you don't have a special relationship with your students, come to youth group some night and strike up a conversation. I'm putting myself in a corner here, but usually I have to say things in order to actually do them. I want to invite some people specifically, and have you there while we're doing a silly game, have you there while we're doing a lesson, and hopefully your life experience, maybe living in context, maybe living out of the right context, can help these students as they grow. We're going to close with the song "To Stand," and I'm not going to ask for anything grandiose, but as you stand here and sing this song, I'm going to have to look because I don't want to misquote it. This is it. The song's going to end on this pre-chorus. It says, "So what can I say and what can I do but offer this heart, O God, completely to you?" Living in that context where we're offering our heart completely to God means to love one another. And these kids, looking around, we've got great parents in this church, but our parents can use the help. Our parents haven't experienced everything that some of you have, and I just pray that you will help pour into these students as we go, because they get tired of listening to me, frankly. And so the more positive role models, the more people who are worried about how they live their life, what context they live their life in, is going to be beneficial, and it's going to end up we're not going to even recognize our church. And I say that in a good way. The roof will be blown off because of what these students do if we are pouring in them right now in the right way and getting them to live in that correct context. Please stand as we sing.